Hi everyone, welcome back. I'm Michael Sandler, your host on Inspire Nation. If you've ever wanted to throw on a cape and transform your life, then do we have the Alter Ego Show for you. Today I'll be talking with Todd Herman, high performance coach and mental game strategist, and the author of a brilliant book on transforming your life that I enjoy so much I found myself saying, God, I love this book, The Alter Ego. And that's just what I want to talk with him about today, about the power of secret identities to transform your life. That, plus we'll talk about Canada to North Carolina, Penelope is on the east side, volleyball and Saskatchewan, Walter Payton and Ronnie Lott, Bo and the Tecmo Bowl, Alonto and the Big Wave, Stephen King and Jason, the power of a Tic Tac, and what in the world, Brutus, Barney, and Bam have to do with anything. So welcome to the show, Todd. Are you ready to shine?
I am ready. Give it to me, man.
Woohoo! All right. So before we dive right into things, we are going to go back in time a little bit. Tell us about growing up on a 6,000 acre ranch in Alberta, Canada, and what that meant to you.
Well, now that I'm living in New York City, I can tell you that the reason many people, when they get to New York City, can get chewed up and spit out by this place is if you don't show up knowing who you are and have your values set, and it can wash you out pretty fast. And so, to go back to your question, I was very fortunate. I had amazing parents that were great mentors, and one of those kind of kids that hit the lottery with on the parenting side of things. But the value of hard work, obviously one of those things. The value of a simple handshake to do a deal, which I saw my dad do all the time. He was an extremely respected farmer in our area, and in fact, when the premier, he was going to be going into the election to be a premier for our province, which is like the governor of a state. When he was going to be running for office, he reached out to my father to get his support, because he knew if he could get my father's support, he could get the people in our area's support as well. So, it was great. I mean, it wasn't. I wasn't the type of kid that was going to be living on a farm for the rest of my life, but it helped me appreciate where I'm at now. And just the value of hard work. And it was I got myself into a lot of trouble. So
speaking of trouble, tell us about challenging Ross and Ryan, your older brothers.
I was the third boy in the family, and Ross and Ryan, my older brothers, were always obviously physically bigger than me, but I was a fairly outgoing and gregarious brother, and drove them both fairly crazy. So I had to learn at a very young age. I couldn't beat people up physically, but I could maybe go toes to toes with them on wit and sarcasm and throwing verbal barbs their way. So I was a pretty good trash talker at a young age. But my brother at my wedding had said, when he was talking, after he told a bunch of funny stories about me, he said, if there's one thing that you cannot take away from Todd, it's that the guy does not quit. He is as persistent as they come. And it's showed up maybe in some of the wins he's had in life in some way. And I guess I'm happy that I have that, because I don't profess to be the smartest person on the planet. Not that I wasn't, even in sports, I wasn't the fastest, the biggest or anything, but I probably was the person who wasn't going to quit.
Awesome. And on that note, I'm going to go to one of it's a pivotal moment in your life, maybe not a highlight of your life. 14, going from Schuler, playing a volleyball tournament in Golden Prairie, Saskatchewan, with somebody who had quite the mean high kick.
Yeah, I was, it's a funny story. I was playing volleyball, and again, I grew up in a rural community, small town. I mean, my school had 65 kids from kindergarten to grade 9 in it, and half of them were my cousins. And so everyone in our area, even the other smaller farming communities, knew each other. But I was playing in a volleyball tournament, and this one kid would go up for a spike all the time, and he would kind of flick his foot out and try to kick me in the crotch. And after the first time, I thought maybe it was an accident. Second time, no, that's not accidental. And after the third time, I said, listen, do this again, and you're kind of in for it. And sure enough, he went up and did it again. And as soon as we landed, I reached through the net, grabbed him by the shirt, pulled him towards me, and threw 2 punches at him, dropped him to the floor. And pretty much created a fairly strong ruckus at a volleyball tournament, because apparently fighting is not something that is typically a part of it. But yeah, it was at that moment that ended up shaping a lot of my, I guess, future vocation, because it got me into the mental game of things, because, I did something I shouldn't have done and I had to control my emotions better.
What did Coach Mr. Henderson, what did he tell you?
Well, I mean, after berating me fairly solidly, and I got kicked out of the tournament as I should have, he said, listen, I know that you've got your ambitions of, going off to college and playing, football or whatever sport you end up deciding to want to play. But if you don't get this whole, you're not a fun player to play with. Like you're all over all your teammates all the time if they make a mistake. You're hyper competitive, which is great, but it's to a point where, like you said, you're just not fun to play with. So, if you don't get this figured out, no one's going to like coaching you. You'll make it, but no one's going to like coaching you. And so, he handed me, as any good coach does, advisor, mentor, whatever, you don't leave someone in that place. You can give them a tool or something to help move them forward. And he said, listen, when you get to school tomorrow, go to the library and pick up this book. And so, I did as he said and went to the library and picked up this book, and it was on kind of like personal leadership. And it wasn't actually a very good book that I recall, but he did mention stuff about just the mind, and I kind of like got very interested in that. And I sort of fell down this rabbit hole of just learning more about how our mind works, how the kind of biology of our brain is made up, the neuroscience of things at a young age. And this was before I got diagnosed with dyslexia. I got a type of dyslexia that makes the content of a paragraph very, very confusing, because by the end of a paragraph, if I'm reading it in a phonetic way, will get all the ideas jumbled up in my head and just confuses me. But there was some stuff that when I got into reading Stephen Hawking and the brief history of time, for some reason that I could actually power through and engage my mind. And what ended up happening for me was I ended up teaching myself how to get into the zone and flow state. And anyone who's ever experienced the zone and flow state, that's where like every single ounce of your capability comes flowing through you and out onto the field of play, and not restricted by the thoughts and concerns and worries and judgments of others, or worrying about making yourself look bad or whatever the case is. You're just so engaged in the process. And I found that at a young age, and I could consistently get into it over and over again, which is what helped me, end up getting college scholarships and things like that.
Awesome. And let's dive into that. I'm thinking actually in May we moved from North Carolina, and we're going to get to North Carolina in a second. I moved from North Carolina to just outside Aspen. We had this massive moving truck, and I had to unload it solo for some reason. I don't even remember now. I had to unload this whole thing solo in a number of hours to get it back to the truck place. We moved into a place that was huge Native American land in the past.
Oh, yeah.
And I said, I'm calling on the elders. Please help me to empty this truck. And I did a superhuman or Superman performance. Maybe you can tell us in your life the importance of Chief Sitting Bull and what the lands have meant to you.
Sure. So, this is what kind of starts tying things in with the book, The Alter Ego Effect, and me playing with this idea and this concept. Where I grew up in southern Alberta, right across the border from Montana, when Chief Sitting Bull, after the Battle of Little Bighorn and being pursued by the U.S. Army, he fled across the border into Canada, and where he ended up kind of settling and roaming around was near our family's land. And so our area is a fairly rich Native American history, and I love Native American history, and just that. Just there's so much about it that's just, there's a romanticism with it, but the leadership that comes out of it, the U.S. Constitution is basically a fantastic plagiarism of, the Native American doctrine. So that world became a big part of myself when I would go and play sport then. And I would take the inspiration of Native American tribes as well and start to use them as this group that would inspire me with their passion to step into a different version of myself when I would go and play sports, along with a couple of other athletes, but like I roamed around our farm a lot, digging around old fire rings, trying to find, arrowheads and,
Yep.
and whatnot. So you live in a very rich area as well.
So then tell us about going from Chief Sitting Bull. Tell us about,
hmm
I'm thinking now of your shoulder pads on
hmm
Walter Payton and Ronnie Lott.
Yeah. And so to kind of carry the idea forward, when I was, I I had football scholarships and whatnot, but I'm not a physically gifted person. I mean, I'm 6 feet, and when I was in high school, I was 155 pounds soaking wet. I wasn't like this physical specimen of a human being, like 234 pounds or something. But I would play a lot bigger than my size, and it would be because I would use the inspiration of some of my heroes when I would go out onto the field. And Walter Payton, Hall of Fame running back for the Chicago Bears, and Ronnie Lott, Hall of Fame defensive player for the San Francisco 49ers, were both like very inspiring to me. So before I would go out and play my games, I had 5 trading cards that I had. One was 3 of them were Walter Payton, and 2 of them were Ronnie Lott. And I would take one of Walter Payton's cards, and I'd stuff it in my helmet. And I'd taken the 2 Ronnie Lott cards. I put one underneath one shoulder pad and one underneath the other shoulder pad, because I wanted to think like Walter Payton out there. I wanted to hit like Ronnie Lott on the field. And then I'd take the other 2 final ones of Walter Payton, and I would stuff them in my thigh pads in my pants, and because I wanted to run like Walter Payton.
Yeah.
And but the final thing that I would do is, because I was also inspired by the Native American tribe, my alter ego when I would go down to the football field's name was Geronimo.
Wow.
And I'd go into my mental movie theater in my mind as I was sitting at my locker, and I would imagine this tribe walk in with Walter Payton, Ronnie Lott, and 5 Native Americans, and they would approach me in that theater, and Walter would hand me the cards, and he'd say, here's a piece of each of us. Go out on that field and show up just like we would out there, but don't you for one second dishonor who we are and how we showed up by not completely honoring how we would show up. And it was that final little emotional thing about making sure that you didn't go out there and worry about what other people thought of you, or worry about how big or small you were, or anything like that. Play as big as we are together, because we're that power tribe that's operating inside of you. And then I would put on my helmet, and that was my kind of switch to get on the field, or to activate, and that would be how I would show up. So Todd didn't go on the field. It was this larger self, Geronimo, that would go out there.
I love it. And
Yeah.
we're going to dive more into that switch in a little bit. In fact, I want to talk about what you call a pivotal moment. Maybe you can tell us about your mentor and how in the world and when in the world you ended up going from Canada to North Carolina.
Yeah. Well, so kind of fast forward through the, so played college, ended up, hurting my knee pretty bad my first year. And I was just not going to classes either. I had started a small business on the side while I was in school. I was more interested in that because I couldn't play football anymore. And anyways, I ended up getting into volunteering at a high school and coaching the defensive backs there a couple of years later. And I had some success in business, but now I was starting to get some traction in this kind of mental game coaching thing that I had fallen into. I was, talking to these youngsters. They were only a few years younger than me, really, but I was giving them my tips on like the routines that I use to get into and play my best, just some mental game stuff that I had learned and had used, and they were getting some really great results. And a good friend of mine, he's one of the top hockey trainers in the world, brought me in to do a couple of workshops with their kids. And this wasn't a business. This was just me. Was me talking about the thing that I was passionate about, helping young athletes. And it started to snowball. People started asking me to mentor their sons and daughters on it. And I was getting some really great results, and my name was starting to grow. But, I didn't know much about the business of becoming a mental game, coach at all. And I had read a bunch of different books and done a lot of different research. And there wasn't very much that resonated with me as someone who played at a higher level. there was just a lot of stuff that I read that just sounded like nonsense. Like it would only make people think more out there, right? And that's actually a bit of an issue I have with the personal help and self-development world, or self-help and personal development world and personal leadership world. Is a lot of stuff is just, it's nice ideas, but it's not stuff that actually works out there. And it's because a lot of people who write stuff, they're not the practitioners. And I would just encourage that to you that's listening, is make sure that whoever it is that you're, getting advice from, because we're not on this planet forever, and I think everyone should be very choosy about who it is that they get their advice from, and practitioners are the ones that are really actually working with people, and they know what's actually working and not working. And then if they have a high level of integrity, they'll tell you what's not working and what is working, and not make themselves sound smart. And so I just read so many different psychologists or sports psychologists, or anyone in biology or physiology, kinesiology. Some of it just sounded like junk. But there was one person in particular that didn't, and that was this gentleman, Harvey Dorfman, who's known as the Yoda of baseball, and rightly so. He worked with basically every single Major League Baseball team. Every single pro knew who he was, and either wanted to work with him or was on a waiting list to work with him. And I reached out to him cold and was just basically said, Mr. Dorfman, we've never had the pleasure of meeting before, but I'm just getting started in this space. Been at it for a couple of years now, and it's going quite well. But I know that I've got a long way to go, and I was wondering if I could maybe come down to North Carolina, where he lived at the time, and could spend some time with you, just organizing your office or taking anything off of your plate, just so I could be around you. And I know you probably have another book in you, because he had already written a couple of books, and maybe I can take off some of that other administrative load, because he had a private practice essentially. Then when we actually got connected, he got on the phone, and I said, basically kind of did my pitch again. And he's like, his first comment was, "Well, you don't think you're going to live with me, do you?" And I was like, no, I'm not going to live with you. I've got an aunt and uncle who live in the area, and I'm going to stay with them. But and after just some back and forth, he agreed and said, "Okay, well, why don't you come down?" It was the off season of Major League Baseball. It was January. And so I went down to North Carolina. And the reality was I didn't have an aunt and uncle who lived down there. But I ended up staying at a Motel 6 for about $28.50 a night.
Very nice.
And I did that for 33 days. And on the 8th day that I was down there, and again, we actually became close really fast. And to know Harvey is one of these people where his lineage, he has spawned many, many, many sort of giants in the mental game, personal leadership world. He was such a profoundly giving human being. He had a very challenger personality, like definitely. That's what I liked about him, was he swore like a trucker, but he gave it to people straight, right between the eyes, and they appreciated that. But anyways, on the 8th day when I was down there, he said, he's like, "Hey, do you want to sit in on tomorrow's session with me? One of the pros is coming down." Yeah. And I was like, "Yeah, I'd love to." And it was Roger Clemens, and Roger Clemens is arguably, he's in the top 10 probably greatest baseball players of all time. Phenomenal pitcher, and so I got to sit in and see how the best pitcher of the day was working with the top mental game coach on the planet. And you talk about a learning curve that goes from taking a long time to see what people are really at the high level talking about, to basically just a steep slope where I saw it on day one. And all of my preconceptions about what someone at that level was going to be talking about with Harvey were all wrong. I mean, it was almost like Harvey was playing very much more like a professional life coach with them, because about 80+% of the content of the conversation was all about the stuff off the field. It impacted the field, but it was all trying to manage that off the field stuff. And then the next day, Andy Pettit came in, and then the next day, Craig Biggio. Like, it was just all-star after all-star after all-star. And it went on for, a week or more. And it was just the absolute crash course masterclass. And it was phenomenal. And then when I got home, Harvey started sending me pro clients because he was overloaded. And he was very kind, because he would tell people, and he almost needed to say it this way, but he would say, "Listen, I can't work with you, but there is someone else that I'm working with who's probably actually better at this stuff than I am. And so I'd like to connect you." And he would say that because, again, people are coming in with the context of, I want to work with the master, Harvey Dorfman. And of course, they don't want to get pawned off to chicken feed off to the left kind of thing. And so he really became a big part of my deal flow early on. And I would get requested to do interviews sometimes. And what I would do is I would actually pass those back to Harvey, because I felt like that was just what I needed to do to get back to Harvey as well. So, yeah, it just goes to show like the power of, I'm very much a product of mentors and advisors. I am not afraid to tuck myself underneath someone's wing and really learn from them, because again, I could not, those 33 days saved me probably 13 to 15 years of trying to do it whatever way I was going to do it. And then just the value of having that close relationship with him was just invaluable.
When did you start? Thank you so much for sharing.
Yeah.
When did you start to come up with, obviously you had played with it as a kid, but
Yeah.
start to come up with your athletes, the idea of the alter ego?
Yeah. So I used it in sport. And then when I started my business, I mean, I was 21, 22, and I felt so insecure about how young I looked, because I looked like I was 12 years old. And I was, even though I was really good at what I did to work with, young amateurs, 12, 13, 14-year-old, 15-year-olds. I was so insecure, like, who's going to believe me when I go on stage and talk about this? Because that was kind of my method of getting clients, was I did a lot of speeches, and but it wasn't, so it was a narrative in my own head. It was just that insecurity. And so I just sat down and I was like, well, how do I want to show up? And I wanted to be more confident, I wanted to be more decisive, I wanted to be more articulate, but I wasn't showing up that way. Even though it was inside, I wasn't showing up that way. And then I just kind of like a spawn of insight was like, wait a second, like, you used Geronimo on the football field. And then I thought, well, can I use Geronimo in business? And it didn't quite work in my head, because I had such a close relationship with Geronimo. I knew he was a very aggressive person, and that wasn't going to serve me in sports, but or in business. But then I thought to, like, wait a second, all the people that I respected growing up, true or not, all had glasses on, and they all wore glasses. And so I'm like, well, why don't I go and get a pair of glasses, and then I'll step into I called it my reverse Superman. Superman puts on the glasses to turn into mild-mannered Clark Kent. Well, I didn't want to turn into mild-mannered anything. I wanted to turn into the Superman version of myself for business. And so that's what I did. This was before wearing glasses was a fashionable thing to do. So I went to Lens Crafters at West Edmonton Mall, and where I lived at the time in Edmonton, Alberta, Canada. And I bought a pair of non-prescription glasses so that I could use that as my way of stepping into this, intentional self that I wanted to bring to the business field. And that's what I did. But then, so I did that. And then when I started working with athletes, about 5 years into my career, there was one conversation I was having with a swimmer, and she had mentioned that she uses this persona when she gets into the pool. And she wasn't the first one to mention that to me, but every other time someone else mentioned it, I was like, oh, that's really cool. Because when I played football, I used Geronimo, and it was more like a conversation of like meeting of the minds. And for whatever reason, I didn't catch up on it until that day. And she explained it, and I was like, wait a second. And I went back through all of my clients and all my notes, and then I started kind of plotting and charting them. And the ones who consistently performed at a high level, where their capability of their performance was always at its peak, a lot of them, not everybody, a lot of them though, were using this idea of a character or persona, or stepping into another version of their self, or an alter ego, or a secret identity. And so I was like, oh, wait a second. So I started calling some of them back up again, because maybe they hadn't worked with me in a while. And I would ask them, hey, what's your process? And I started unpacking it, and I created this process for how to build an alter ego. And that became kind of one of my go-to things that I would use with athletes to build out alter egos for people. Because in the end, I ended up becoming more of a kind of, my moniker is I'm a quick hit artist. I would come in and be the guy that when you needed to transform your performance in a short amount of time, that was kind of my niche that I found. I didn't typically play in the like long-term relationship. I had a bunch of those clients, but I was, and it's because of the alter ego method and what's in the book for the alter ego effect, that I would use the people, because I'd get called on a Wednesday when someone was playing at the US Open here in New York City on a Saturday, and I don't get a chance. My long-term strategy that I use with every single person, meditation. You cannot beat it as a long-term strategy for peak performance. There's just nothing that can beat it. I mean, I've done this for over 20 years now, and as a long-term strategy to develop what I call the triune person. Back then I called it the triune athlete, the mentally, emotionally, and physically tough athlete. Well, to develop a triune human, a mentally, emotionally, and physically tough human, meditation is the bee's knees. I mean, it's just as good as it gets. And so, but going in and getting someone to meditate on a Wednesday so that they could perform at their peak on a Saturday, that's just not going to happen.
So what would you do? What's step number
Well,
one? You're thrown in there.
Yeah. Well, I would go in and using an alter ego would be one of the first places that I would go to, because what's so powerful about it, everyone already knows how to do it. Like this idea, just to give some context even to the listeners.
Yeah.
This is the book comes out February 5th, but it's a traditionally published book. It's not self-published. And we had 19 publishers interested in this book. And if you know anything about the publishing world, if you get 2 meetings with a publisher, that's a good book. If you get 5 to 8 meetings, that's a great book. That 19 number is an unheard of number. And I can say that and brag about that number all I want, because I didn't get that many people because I've got a platform like Michelle Obama or, insert any big name, Kobe Bryant. It's the power of the idea, because everyone that would walk into the room would say, what's crazy is I feel like I've been doing this in my life. And I'm like, I 100% know you have, because using an alter ego is a part of the human condition. Every single human on the planet has done it and used it. Because when you go back to when you were a young kid, you played with the idea of, a cowboy or a fireman or a nurse or Wonder Woman or Superman, or nowadays it's the Black Panther and the Incredible Hulk, or you played out these ideas, or your favorite hockey player or your football player or whatever. That's you leveraging the idea. That's all this is. It's very natural for us to do it, but then people forget about their creative imagination. And that's really one of our great superpowers, is the use of a creative imagination. It's the one thing that we're truly gifted with on this planet that separates us from the other animals. No other animal on the planet has the power of their creative imagination to suspend the disbelief about what they can and cannot do, to create heavens from hell and hells from heaven. That's what we do as human beings. We create stories and narratives in our head, and yet we forget that that's really a superpower that we can use. Well, what an alter ego does is it taps into that creative imagination, and it allows someone to get past maybe some of their insecurities gracefully and pull their capabilities out onto the field of play. Because now you're not taking that kind of wounded self, possibly that self that's concerned about criticism, and you're allowing Wonder Woman to get out there and perform with you. I took Geronimo out there, and Geronimo could do things that I somehow just couldn't do on my own. And who cares? If I couldn't do it, it was still me going out there and performing. And that's the amazing part of this, is the more that you do this, what you start to do is you create this phenomenal feedback loop. And Cary Grant, the amazing golden age actor from the 1940s and 50s, was known for being exceptionally debonair, good-looking man. He had this great quote near the end of his life where he said, "I pretended to be somebody I wanted to be, and I finally became that person, or he became me. Or we met at some point." And, he said he used the word pretended, but really he was bringing a very intentional self out there. He was someone who battled depression for a lot of his life, and he didn't want to be ruled by it. So he started activating his creative imagination and really creating the Cary Grant that everyone, came to kind of know and revere. And that's what happens. It's almost like a Venn diagram of, you have this idea of yourself on one side, mm-hmm. and that might have limitations around it. But then when you start engaging with the idea of taking some other inspiration out onto the field, at some point in time, like he said, they merged and they became the same. Just like with myself, I don't need the glasses nowadays in order to be a confident, decisive artist. I became that person a long, long time ago. Now I wear them because I actually like to wear them for dress, but also for me. And I talk about this in the book. Typically, you keep your alter ego a private thing. It's private to you. Some people might share it, but typically it's private. And so I wear it as a signal to other people that I'm showing up very intentionally so I can bring the absolute best of myself to serve people. And also as a signal to other people that it's okay to use this powerful concept to get the best out of yourself.
Awesome. I want to talk about activating our heroic self. And as we dive into that, there's a fascinating study from University of Minnesota on psychological distance.
Yeah. So a study was done on with 4 to 6-year-old kids actually, and they wanted to kind of just play with this idea, and then just see how much, if it gave them any extra perseverance or grit to help them, kind of tackle their activity. So what they did is they brought a bunch of 4 to 6-year-olds into a room, and they gave them all this puzzle that was actually an unsolvable puzzle. You couldn't complete the puzzle, and they got them working on it, and they were tracking the time and seeing how long they would stick with it, and then they kind of cataloged kind of how they were expressing themselves verbally as well. So they got all that information, and at some point in time they would quit on the task. Then what they did was they rolled in this rack of superhero costumes, Batman and Dora the Explorer kind of specifically, and they got the kids to choose their favorite costume, and they put on that costume, and then they got them to do another puzzle that was unsolvable, and again they just wanted to see if they would last longer with the puzzle, and they did. Their levels of grit and perseverance went way up. Well, one thing that was surprising to them was how their self-talk changed. And specifically, they would say something like, well, Batman wouldn't quit, so I'm not going to quit. Yeah. Right? They've adopted that idea, that persona for themselves now, which is a positive one. And they're acting through that to get more out of themselves. And that's the power of this. That's why I call it the alter ego effect. There is an effect that's happening for you when you use this. Just like myself, when I put on those glasses, the effect for me was I stepped into that more confident, articulate, and decisive self, and I was adopting traits of some of my superheroes. Superman was one of them. But specifically, there was Joseph Campbell, who wrote The Hero's Journey and The Hero with a Thousand Faces, just one of my heroes. Martin Luther King, one of them, as well as like Abraham Lincoln. Walter Payton was still there with me as well because I just revered him. But I was stepping into and I was taking them with me out there. And it's such a powerful thing when you see it with kids. Now, I've got 3 little ones here in New York City, and we use it with them all the time as well. There's another concept I talk about in the book, which is that kind of shadow self that shows up, and we call it the enemy, where the enemy uses many different hidden forces to pull us into, what I kind of coin as the ordinary world, and the reason we call it ordinary is because we're not getting the results that we want. We're not performing like we know that we can. And when that happens to people, at our core, what that experiences for people is we feel like we've got a trapped self, right? That there's this part of us that's trapped. It's not getting out there. And for whatever reason, it could be because of past trauma. It could be because of imposter syndrome and worrying about what other people are thinking of us, or just discounting our wins. Or it could be about tribal narratives, which are very pervasive. It's that kind of idea around, well, my family has never been an entrepreneur, so why would I be an entrepreneur? Yeah. Or no one from my community made it, so why would I? Or no one from my country. Like they operate right below the surface and typically out of the reach of people's consciousness. And so when our kids are, acting up or whatever, the worst thing that we could do is shape their identity by telling them that they would be bad or misbehaving. So instead what we say is, oh, there's that little gremlin again. That's not Sophie. Where's Sophie? And again, we make it a game of it. And it helps us to create this great line of delineation between those two selves. I mean, duality exists, and all we're doing is reinforcing that with the way that we parent.
Awesome. So let's talk about going from ordinary to extraordinary, and maybe Beyonce and Sasha Fierce.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, she's such a great example because, here's a young woman that grew up in Houston, Texas, in a gospel family, singing gospel music every Sunday, and people from her area would, clamor every Sunday to get to that church to hear her sing. And obviously her parents saw this kind of talent that she had, and her sister even, and started to get her into a dance and singing group in Houston area. And then eventually they're started to sing, they're dancing on stage somewhat provocatively. They're singing provocative lyrics when she gets into Destiny's Child, right? And now when you think of, like, she grew up, and at her core that she's this, young gospel girl singing gospel music, very pure, and now she's doing this. And so it was a real struggle for her, because that wasn't a part of her, how she saw herself and her identity. But she still wanted to explore that creative side of herself. And so she created Sasha Fierce. And Sasha Fierce was all about being, loud and gregarious out there, and commanding the stage, and even the name itself, Fierce, like, fiercely attacking the stage. And she even, in many interviews, just talks about how it was like an out-of-body experience for her when she would be out there. But it allowed her to get that self out. And then, fast forward a decade, and she famously retired Sasha Fierce, and because she said that, I don't need her anymore to get out there. Well, it's the same thing as me. I didn't need that. My alter ego for business was Richard. I didn't need Richard anymore. I had became that self. And so she didn't need Sasha Fierce, so she retired her. But that allowed her to go from this ordinary world that she could have stayed stuck in, where she was concerned about, is my, what's everyone going to think of me from my church because I'm singing this, or whatever the narrative could be in her head. And she stepped into and found that extraordinary world where, and again, the extraordinary world isn't this place where, it's gumdrops and lollipops and rainbows and butterflies. Challenges exist there. Yeah. It's just that you're acting from an inside out approach. You're acting with a lot of intention about who and what is going to be showing up on that field of play for you, so you can perform at your best. And whether you just do that with your own power, or whether you do that through the help of leveraging an alter ego as a bridge to help make it there, it doesn't matter. I mean, because now the most real, authentic you is actually getting out there. If there's an objection people have, is they're so concerned about being inauthentic. Well, inauthenticity is you doing things in a way, doing things with the intent of deceiving other people or tricking other people. Okay. So this has nothing to do with that. This isn't about the idea of faking it till you make it, which is a terrible term. This is all about actually activating these core qualities that are already inside of you. You're just playing them through the idea of someone or something else, which helps activate them.
Beautiful. I want to talk about choosing our alter ego. But before we do that, I was having a coaching call with somebody, a potential coaching call with somebody last night, and got a call back this morning saying, sorry, can't do it right now, on and on it went.
Yeah.
And what I realized is her gremlins had overtaken her in that email. What is a circular bullying conversation? Because this is exactly where it went in her mind.
Yeah. I call it like the merry-go-round effect. Is, when we just stay operating inside of, we have a singular voice that we're always operating through, where we kind of beat ourselves up, and we don't recognize it as, there's this enemy that everyone has it. Carl Jung talked about the shadow self. And that's where this is kind of inspired by, is when I'm working with an athlete, there's a lady that I talk about in the book, Rachel, tennis player.
Yeah.
And there was, she was a phenomenal talent and skill on the court. And she would quickly get out in front of people and be beating them handily. And then after a while, she'd start to take her foot off the proverbial pedal. And, as everyone knows, and from your own competition, momentum is everything in athletics. When you have momentum, an average athlete with momentum can now take down, the LeBron James of that world, whoever it might be, and because it breeds confidence, and then that breeds certainty. And so that's what happened for her. She was kind of one of these people who was the classic. She should be winning more major tournaments. And again, she's playing at the top of the game of tennis. So I've been working there for a little while, and there was something I couldn't crack the nut on her. And so one day we were out for lunch at one of my favorite places here in New York City, Penelope's, and I reached for the check, and she was like arguing with me about paying because I had paid for the last couple of them, and she was getting like it was actually really bothering her. And then it occurred to me, wait a second, this is the thing that's stopping her. So her base value, the one thing that she really operates a lot of her life through, is fairness.
Yeah.
She really values fairness. It's a wonderful quality to have, right? But on the field of play of sport, fairness can hurt many athletes because they end up feeling bad for the people that they might be beating, and that's not fair. Well, that doesn't belong on the field of play. And sportsmanship, yes, but not fairness to allow someone to only lose by a little bit. And in fact, you're actually robbing that other person of developing themselves more, because, I know I've had a lot of clients who they found that other gear when they got their, proverbial asses handed to them in a sport or a game or something like that. Okay. And so, we talked about that. And then when we were building up more of her alter ego, fairness didn't exist for her. And, but when it would start to, because it didn't just go away, when it would start to show up, now you can have another conversation where we've named the enemy, and it could be, name it whatever you want. Whether it's Jason or pick a bully from your past and it's Sally, and now you're going to talk, could be Darth Vader or something like that. Just give it a name. And now you can have a tennis match in your head where it's a two-way conversation instead of a circular conversation of you going around and around with yourself. And so for Rachel, it'd be like, listen, this is my court. This is my field. Fairness is great, but you step to the sidelines because I'm not done playing yet. And then you can operate out there. But on this court, this is mine. I own this. So get to the sidelines. And typically it would maybe be voiced in a fairly stronger tone than that. But that's the power of naming an enemy and giving it a name. And, again, me as someone who's like, moving forward and always growing and trying to charge forward, there's always those moments where that shadow starts to show up. But I'll push it to a sidelines more than not.
I'm going to share a really funny personal example of this. In our house, I guess maybe it's because of my upbringing. In the kitchen, I get real sensitive about being criticized about something, because as a kid, I was always spilling the milk. I was always dropping things. And so nobody could be harder on me in the kitchen than myself. And so my wife would jump in and say, why don't you? And I would get my guard up. And it occurred to me a few years ago, and I said, Jessica, here's what I want you to do. If I've done something and you want to make suggestions, say, it's okay, boo-boo head, but... And by giving that alter ego, that sensitive child who's so afraid of getting criticized, by calling him boo-boo head, she can get in without my nervous system shifting at all. In fact, I can almost chuckle about it because of the name that it was given.
Yeah. That's exactly it being put to use. 100%.
So tell us on that note, how do we choose our own alter ego?
Well, I mean, like I say in the book, it was actually the hardest part of writing the book because, for 15 years, it was very much a field process with people. There's no it's like the center of town. There's many streets and avenues and ways to get there. It's not sequential, but a book is sequential, right? You got to flip the page kind of thing. And it was something I was really struggling with until, after chapter 3, which really kind of builds the foundation of everything. Then we get into actually unpacking and repacking and building the alter ego. And so at the beginning of chapter 4, I talk about how, hey, this is a choose your own adventure. If you're super interested in learning about how to use a totem and an artifact to activate your alter ego, go read chapter 14. If you want to learn about, activating the superpowers in chapter 12, or then go and read that one, because you're going to bounce around and it's fine. That's not a wrong way to read the book. And so, but if there was a starting point, it's you always build an alter ego in context. Mm-hmm. You're only building it for one field of play, right? We all have many roles that we play in life. It could be parent, it could be husband, it could be wife, it could be, athlete, it could be, your vocation, it's son, daughter, all these different areas that we friend that we live in. And of course, we all understand that, how I show up with my friends and how I show up with my kids is typically a different self that's showing up, right? There's different elements that I'm magnifying when I'm with them. So that doesn't, cause any sort of concern for people. But building out an alter ego that's supposed to operate across all those fields just is not how we use it. It's contextual. So when you're building out your alter ego and you're using this for yourself, what's the area of your life right now that you're most frustrated with? Because that's the easiest one to go and use it for. The place that most people go, they think of like sport, or they think of like, entertainers, or they think about like their vocation, so work. But sometimes it's better for some people to build it out because they're frustrated in their parenting life. Mm-hmm. So they want to use something that's going to draw out a better set of qualities with them when they're with their kids. That's what I do with mine. I mean, the last thing that my kids need is the confident, decisive, and articulate Todd to show up when he gets home, right? They don't want that. They want fun, playful, gentle, excited, and get on the floor and muck around with them, Todd. And so for me, my source of inspiration, because I do have I work with elite human beings, and just the nature of that is, in order to work with them, you got to challenge them. You got to really, there's so many of my clients who they've got nothing but yes people around them. And that's the last thing that I am. So I'm a challenger personality with them. And because that's reinforced day after day, it's habit, it's routine. The last thing I need to do with my kids is be a challenger all the time. That just doesn't work. And so it comes out with definitely helping them grow, but I wanted to bring out more of a gentle self with them. And so, who's the one of the greatest sources of that kind of gentle personality with kids? Well, Mr. Rogers is. And so that's what I do, is I bring out that self when I'm with them. And I can tell you just a story. My middle daughter, Sophie, she is, she's filled with a lot of energy. Let's just say that. And she's got a fairly strong emotional bandwidth. She's got high highs and some pretty fast lows that she can get to. And when she goes and has one of these screaming fits, it's very easy for me, because that's a force that I'm reckoning with, right? And so as a parent, you're going to impart your force on it now too, because you're the bigger, stronger person. And, that's definitely how I probably parented her in the first little bit. And it just isn't working. All that's doing is prolonging her tantrum for 15 minutes or 20 minutes. But then when I was like, wait a second, let's bring this idea into my parenting. And let's step into Mr. Rogers. Well, what would Mr. Rogers do? He's going to get down on one knee like he would do with every single kid, get down to their level. And he would lower his voice and be soft and gentle. And he would probably give them a hug. And so it was amazing. That was exactly what I did the very first time. As soon as she had her fit, even though I've got rage building inside of me, I grabbed her and gave her a big hug, and she just melted. Like it went from like a typical 15, 20-minute meltdown to 15, 20 seconds. And then and we know kids, it's like so frustrating because they can be having an absolute meltdown. And then 20 seconds later, they're off laughing with their siblings and they're playing. And you're like, how do you do that? Well, I'm not here to try to explain it away or figure all that out. It doesn't really bother me, or it's, it would drive me crazy if I tried to figure it out. But the only thing I care about is the result changed. She was happy again. And so that was me leveraging that idea. And now it's kind of that whole, I pretended to be somebody I wanted to be, and I became that person. Now it's my first response with all of my kids is to do that.
There's a story you have in the book about someone doing dressage, which is a very, very challenging event because, and I work with a U.S. gold medalist in dressage. I have given him the idea of being a Zen dressage master, almost an Obi-Wan Kenobi of the dressage, because animals are horses more than anything else, an amplifier.
Yeah. I loved that sport when I got involved in it. I mean, I'm a farm kid, so I was around horses at a young age. I'm not an accomplished rider by any stretch of the imagination, but of all the sports, it's so challenging because, like you just said, now you have a human being. Like when I'm working with a basketball player or a golfer, there's certain signals that I can see when looking at them that they're carrying tension or stress or whatever. To other people, they probably wouldn't notice it. But when you're working with someone who's in the equestrian world and in dressage, they're sitting on top of a massive amplifier I mean, that's why horses are used in so much therapy that's out there, because of just their sensitive nature with humans. And so if you're feeling any amount of tension or anxiety or stress or worry, that horse is going to magnify that and do the exact same thing. And it'll show up in it making silly mistakes, it being jittery, it having, active feet and all that kind of stuff. And so working with my client, and then many, many, many more clients, she was very much a type A personality, and she would bring that into the arena, which wouldn't work typically with a horse. And she was definitely underperforming, and she had a horse that could take her a long way. And so when I asked her, I'm like, who would you most want to embody, or who did you admire growing up for like their qualities of like strength and calm, and because these were all words that she was already using, and she didn't miss a beat. And she was like, the 1970s version of Wonder Woman. Mm-hmm. And this is before even the current Wonder Woman became, this is several years ago. And so I said, well, then let's build on that. And I talk in the book about how important it is to find that totem to activate your alter ego. And so she went out and she made a custom bracelet, and just like Wonder Woman, not exactly like hers, but similar-ish. And I had said to her, when you're getting it made, make sure that the clasp on it is tight and it creates a nice snapping sound to it. Because when it comes to triggering events, people overlook the value of sound. Sound is such a powerful way of activating, our emotions. And so that's what she did. And that snapping sound was, in that moment, that's when Wonder Woman would take over inside of her to then go out. And she transformed in a year. She went from someone who was very much, middle of the pack, to someone who ended up consistently winning, world championship tournaments. It was awesome.
Do we all need a totem?
Well, in the beginning, it's the thing that helps you to really step into it. Does everyone need it? No. It all depends on someone's ability to engage their imagination. And some people have maybe a stronger use of their imagination than others. And to maybe those people, they don't need it. But for me, it was always, if there was, 3 things that I would definitely get everyone to do starting off, a totem and an artifact, using something to help activate it would be a big part of that process.
So you said 3 things, so I've got to ask. Give me the 3.
Well, so there's that. It's giving your alter ego a name as well, and then of course defining what those superpower qualities are that you're being very intentional that are drawing out there. Knowing and naming them is powerful. Just like myself. So it's down to just one simple little to phrase. So myself, when it comes to being a parent, is my gentle self. Beautiful. That's the self I need to remember, because I don't need to. I already have the challenger part of me ingrained in me, and that shows with the way that I encourage my kids, and I challenge them constantly to grow and to not quit on themselves with something. But there's a gentle self that needs to come out with them too.
Beautiful. We get to start to wrap things up. But before we do that, before we ask a few wrap-up questions, I've got to ask, what's the story behind the Tic Tac?
Well, so this gets back to that idea of a totem and an artifact. And when I was showing up and I was working with one of my young hockey players, because it was a home visit, because most of the people that I worked with early on, it was always in-home visits with the teenagers. And I showed up with a box of Tic Tacs, and I had the label pulled off of it. And after we got done building our alter ego, I handed her the Tic Tacs and I said, I want you to keep these in your bag. And right before you go on the ice, I want you to take one of these. And what I want you to know is that I want you to really, really imagine that this pill contains all of those qualities that you most want to show up out on that ice. And because the alter ego is an inside out approach, it's not about wearing something to fake it or something like that. It's really something that you are owning on the inside. This gets inside of you. I wanted to get something inside of people, to help make that idea even that much more resonant. And so that's what she did, is that she had that ritual of dropping the Tic Tac in her mouth right before she would, put on her helmet and go out on the ice, and it would just, radiate kind of as she played. And that was always what I did with all my athletes early on, was give people these box of Tic Tacs. And so now even I've created this pill. It's a placebo pill. There's nothing in it, but it's called Activate, and it's on the label it says your heroic self awaits. And so people can get just that little bottle and keep it with them as a reminder, but then take it as well, so that they're very intentional about who and what is showing up for them.
Very cool. On that note, then, where can people go to find your brilliant book, to find out more, to find the videos you were telling me about, and to find the superpower pill as well?
Well, I mean, my home base on the internet is toddherman.me, TODD, Herman.me. And, for the book, for a direct link for the book, they can go to alteregoeffect.com. And I've created some, inspirational, very motivational videos around this idea. And people can get the links for those things on my website. And of course, all the links to my social media are on there too.
Fantastic. And if you didn't catch toddherman.me and alteregoeffect.com, come on over to inspirenationshow.com, where we'll also have URLs to your videos, and awesome. We'll get you over to toddherman.me and alteregoeffect.com. I've got just we'll see if we can freeze in 3 quick questions for you. First off, I want you to give people a homework assignment so they take action today. What would that be, Todd?
Well, the first homework assignment is just that idea of, okay, well, what area of your life right now are you most frustrated with? Do you most want to, show up as a more empowered self on it, and then start playing with this idea? Like I say in the book, I didn't invent alter egos. It's been out there for a very long time. Cicero was the first person to coin the phrase back in 44 BC. And really, its root term means the other eye or trusted friend. And, we can all use more allies in our life to help us do the hard things that we want to go and do. And this one leverages the power of our creative imagination and develop a trusted friend in there to help us go out and do the things that we want to do. So find that first contextual spot that you want to maybe change, and then play with what are the superpower qualities that I'd most like to bring up. What are the characteristics I want to start showing up more as, like I did with the gentle self, or in business, it was the confident self, right?
Fantastic. Yeah. And then any words of wisdom for parents for their kids?
They eat this up. If there's a group of people who are still locked in their creative side, it's young kids. And so getting them to so we have a whole massive drawer of capes and uniforms and things like that. And so even when they're struggling with something, even giving them a cape and say, you know what, how do you think Wonder Woman would, handle learning the ABCs? Or how do you think Batman, or insert anyone that they might like? Right now, I mean, my kids are in love with Paw Patrol. So anything that's related to those pups, they're engaged with. But using it with them is powerful. And then again, like I had said before, we all have this sort of natural ability to want more for other people than we want for ourselves. So even though I just got done saying that you can use this with your kids, you're going to get way more impact if you use it with yourself. And just playing with that idea of, hey, what if there was one quality that I'd really love to show up more with my kids? What would that be? And then who already embodies it? And then you're going to maybe use and leverage that person when you're dealing with your kids.
Awesome. Any last words of wisdom you want to share with people today?
Well, it's actually not something that we kind of just highlighted in a little bit, but I can tell you that, and I've had some, career success, but I can tell you early on, the biggest mistake that I made was that I wanted to climb life's mountain on my own, so that when I got to the top of it, I could plant the flag and say, ha, I did it. And it was, looking back, it was exceptionally stupid, and it was an exceptionally slow way of doing it. And once I got into the rhythm of having mentors and advisors and coaches and just accumulating more and more allies to help me out, I mean, I was always within arm's length of someone that I could reach out to for help. And again, I think you would agree too that I say to people, relationships are the grease slide to success. And so I would just encourage people to never or always be focused on constantly developing more and more quality relationships, finding more and more quality people to be around. The fact that, and this is a group of people, if they're listening to a podcast, if people actually understood the demographics of people who listen to podcasts, especially one like this, you're in a very rarefied air of people who are performing on the planet. But don't do things on your own. It's a very slow way. Have the humility to ask for help when you need it, and have the humility to be coached by other people as well. It's just a quality that those people who perform at a high level have.
I couldn't agree more. Thank you, Todd. This has been absolutely phenomenal. So for everyone out there, this is Michael Sandler saying, be well, have fun, get the alter ego, and begin discovering your own superhero today, and shine bright. Woohoo! This was awesome.
Thank you, man. Hope that worked for you.
Thanks so much for watching. If you enjoyed it, be sure to like below. Also, leave your comments. Have some real fun with it. Subscribe to our channel where you're going to get more great videos, more interviews coming up. And check out our website, inspirenationshow.com. That's where you'll find tips, blogs, information, videos you won't find anywhere else, and useful and helpful resources to really help you kickstart your life and to shine bright. Thanks so much again. Thank you for your support. Like, comment, subscribe. See the website. Thanks so much and have fun. Of course, shine bright. Woohoo!